Now, for the first time in nearly 24 years, Russian President Vladimir Putin is visiting North Korea. His much heralded arrival in Pyongyang was, unsurprisingly, the top story on the news there. The country's leader, Kim Jong-un, welcomed Mr. Putin on a red carpet in the main square in front of huge crowds, marching soldiers and a military band. They then spent 2 hours in discussion, which resulted in the signing of a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty, which, according to the Russian media, includes a mutual defense clause. During the meeting, Mr. Kim underlined his support for Russia, and Mr. Putin thanked the North Korean leader for his support and also attacked the West.
The comprehensive partnership agreement signed today provide, among other things, for mutual assistance in the event of aggression against one of the participants in this document. I agree that is a truly breakthrough document reflecting the desire of the two countries not to stop there, but to raise our relations to a new qualitative levels.
The relations between the two countries have been elevated to a higher level as an alliance. This has provided a legal foundation on which we can fulfill two governments' grand plan and our people's wishes of building stronger countries while protecting the safety of the world and region.
Kim Jong-un and before him Vladimir Putin. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by Arise European Affairs analyst Dr. Marrick Laskiewicz, who's been monitoring that meeting and the visit of President Putin to North Korea. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. What do we know about this document that's been signed by Mr. Putin and Mr. Kim? I understand it's going to be the basis of the relationship between North Korea and Russia going forward.
That is quite correct, but there are two things which must be mentioned. First and foremost, it was not, of course, the result of 2-hour discussions, but it's taken quite so many months to prepare, presumably. But more importantly, that's all we know of the document. Russia, for example, is no stranger to secret protocols with the document, the most infamous one being, of course, the Molotov-Ribbentrop, a pact which contained clauses about the war with Poland. It therefore follows that what we know is benign enough in the sense it does not threaten anyone. It only talks about defensive wars, but that's all we know. There could be more. And of course, hopefully, although hopefully there won't be, we will find out in due course what this all means.
Well, absolutely. And in terms of the most striking detail to emerge, I mean, you're quite right in saying that it's sort of trickling out. Would it be the question of military cooperation between Russia and North Korea, which Mr. Putin spoke about at that meeting in rather vague terms, saying that Moscow is not ruling out military technical cooperation between the two countries?
Actually, although that is important, there is another aspect which is almost equally important. Russia is now supplying raw materials to North Korea, including food. And of course, that will help shore up the North Korean dictatorship, because obviously the better it is there, the more happier the people will be. And therefore, the chances of replacing that regime are almost minimal at present. Equally, the fact that, as you rightly point out, there's not just the question of supplying munitions to Russia, but also military technology going to North Korea is, of course, the other and far more important of the 2 points. What is important here is, and this is the key point, is does North Korea have anything pretensions to make about South Korea? None of this has emerged, absolutely none. But it would seem to be the key point, because after all, North Korea came within a whisker of conquering South Korea before, and therefore a military cooperation suggests they're going to use the arms. And there's only one place where North Korea really wants to go, is South Korea. So therefore, this is a further aspect which will emerge. However, one important point, Russia is not going to run out of munitions in the near future, which means, as I said before, the war will go on.
Yes, indeed. And also instructively, they agreed to provide mutual assistance in case of aggression, either against North Korea or Russia, which presumably means defense. But then you talk about what this would mean in terms of the war in Ukraine. How much bad news is it for Kyiv?
Oh, it's doubly bad news. And the first bad news is that Russia has now got enough munitions. That's as I've stated. But the second one is, what precisely does one mean about aggression? What precisely is defense? Let us say tomorrow an American missile fired from Ukraine lands on indisputably Russian soil. Now, as far as Ukraine is concerned in the West, this is legitimate because the missile was fired from Russian soil onto Ukraine previously. However, depending on how you look at it, this could even be interpreted, or rather said to be, an aggressive attack. The problem is that these sort of defensive treaties could quite easily turn with nothing more than a sleigh of hands with the words into an excuse for far more action.
Indeed. And you, of course, Dr. Laskiewicz, have written at least 4 books assessing the possibility of any crisis with Russia spiraling into a military confrontation involving the use of weapons of mass destruction that could result in the end of the planet as we know it. I mean, we're looking at one of those, the cover of one of those books on the screen right now, and you predicted that the most likely fatal crisis site would be Ukraine. I mean, you made that prediction as far back as 1993. Do you still see this Russian war escalating into World War III?
Alas, yes. Alas, yes. The problem is the escalation will not take place in huge steps because, as I pointed out in that book you pointed out now, the route of mutually assured destruction is precisely a route. It was originally worked out in order to stop World War III, was actually a route to World War III, because the route will be by small steps, incremental. So, for example, President Biden allowed the use of American missiles to strike indisputably Russian soil. That's a further minor escalation. Equally, when the EU decided, in order to defray costs, they will make use of some Russian interest on the frozen Russian assets, that's another small step. And it will be by means of small steps that, unfortunately, we will eventually end up there. The point is we must stop it as soon as possible, if at all possible. And the only way of doing so is by means of a peace treaty, which neither side likes but will accept. And I have, for example, I have written to several governments about this. For example, the High Commission of South Africa here in London, as to whether they could spearhead such an attempt, because the problem is the West and Russia are locked. They're totally different peace proposals with no attempt at all by either side to compromise, and therefore the compromise or suggestion must come from other non-aligned nations, hence my, for example, letter to South Africa.
Very, very interesting, and I would recommend those books for anybody who wants to understand what is going on in Ukraine, but also the background to the story, as well as understanding a bit more about Russia. Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you very much indeed. We always appreciate your analysis. He is, of course, a RISE European Affairs analyst. He's talking to me there on the line from London.